History and Culture podcasts are a production of PCN, a nonprofit television network. Listeners like you make our programming possible. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit pcntv.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.
Welcome to PCN's History and Culture podcast. I'm Phil Beckman. This podcast series features interviews exploring Pennsylvania's rich history from the colonial era to industrialization, the Gettysburg Campaign to sports history, and from art to politics and more.
We're joined by Doug Miller, Museum Director at Pennsbury Manor. Welcome.
Thank you.
Many people know who William Penn is, but fewer are familiar with his wife, Hannah Penn. Why do you think that is?
I think Penn's work has overshadowed Hannah's life, and it's unfortunate because she is a powerhouse. And 19th century historians, even 20th century historians, tended to focus on the male of the couple, and Penn did so much that Hannah kind of seems to have taken the sidelines. And that's not fair.
What was Hannah's early life like growing up in England?
So Hannah was born to first-generation Quakers. Her parents worked with linen. They were actually, her father, Thomas Callaghill, was a fabulously wealthy linen merchant. So she is born into the Quaker faith, picks up her mother's name because her mother's first name is Hannah as well. And Mom actually instills a lot of social responsibility in young Hannah. They, as Quakers, are working on social relief in England at that time and in Bristol proper. One of the things that was sort of unfolding in England at that time is the founder of the Quaker faith is starting to proselytize against slavery, and Bristol, England is a slaving port. Dad, on the other hand, had invested a great deal in Hannah's upbringing with financial responsibility. She was active in the business and picked up a great business sense. Sadly, she was the only one of their 9 children to survive to adulthood.
So how does she first become involved in business and finance, other than picking it up from her father?
So really, it is in her father's business where she picks up the abilities that she carries throughout her life, strong financial responsibility, and a great sense for business. And again, Thomas Callaghill was a great model as not just a father and a Quaker, but as a businessman. He had amassed quite a fortune, and when his future son-in-law gets this new colony called Pennsylvania, Thomas Callaghill one of the first guys to buy in, a first purchaser. And he buys 5,000 acres from William Penn of Pennsylvania, sight unseen, as an investment. Today, of course, we have Callaghill Street in Philadelphia.
So how did Hannah and William Penn meet then?
So they had actually met through the parents. William was aware of Hannah when she was quite young. William was at that point madly in love with his first wife, Guliama Springett. Guli and William were married in 1671, and they had a loving relationship, many children. William Penn would lose his first wife in the early 1690s, and he was devastated. He mourned for 1 to 2 years and caught the eye of this daughter who had now grown up, of Thomas Callaghill. She was 25 at the time, and he begins to court her. Part of the, I always found amusing aspect of the courtship is she actually blows him off. And he will write letters where, I've written to you 3 or 4 times, why don't you get back to me? And Hannah is not somebody to be pressured. She is her own person and had made a life decision to go that far without taking a life mate. Well, a third party gets involved in the courtship. William Penn had a daughter from his first marriage named Letitia. So Letitia starts to correspond with Hannah, her future stepmother. Hey, take a second look at Dad. He's pretty okay. And between Letitia and William, the courtship ends successfully, and Hannah Callaghill becomes Hannah Penn.
So early on in their marriage, how did Hannah and William collaborate in managing Pennsylvania affairs early on?
So the Pennsylvania affairs were pretty messy at that point, and there's holes in the correspondence record, in particular in Penn's correspondence record. The Penn papers stay together until after the American Civil War. They're in England at the time. And the last male descendant of William actually sells him to two rag dealers in London. One rag dealer takes this correspondence, which of course has a lot of Hannah's correspondence in it as well, and recognizing it's 200 years old, starts it to part out to collectors, archives, universities. The other half we think were pulped. So there's a lot of holes in that. What we see is Pennsylvania is a mess. The government is not working the way Penn had set it up. Penn's lieutenant governor here, William Markham, had given concessions, really trying to do right by Penn. There is a war that has broken out. The Crown wants taxes and support for the royal colony of New York in this military affair. The Quaker-dominated legislature at Pennsylvania was not having it unless Markham made concessions in the Constitution of Pennsylvania at that time, which went directly against some of the things the Crown wanted and Penn wanted. There were problems with the Navigation Acts. There's piracy going on. And all of this, William and Hannah would have been involved in and interested in following as it comes to a head. And the concessions that Captain Markham, he was a seafaring captain, gives to the legislature at the time, Penn's like, I got to go and straighten this out. At that point, Hannah is expecting their first child. It is 1699, and Hannah, Letitia, William, and William's new secretary, who's a young man named James Logan, all board the ship the Canterbury. And they set sail for Pennsylvania from England in the fall. The tides and the storms delay their landing until late November of 1699. They landed upland. They had a piracy scare. Turns out the ship that was seen on the horizon was not a pirate ship, but William will take his wife and his daughter below decks, and young James Logan will man one of the guns, only to be dressed down by his boss. James, you're a Quaker and you can't be on a cannon. Fortunately, the sails that they saw were an English merchant vessel, and there were no pirates that interfered with them during their trip. Once they make landfall, Penn arranges to rent a house in Philadelphia. He has his dream home, Pennsbury Manor, further up the Delaware. But Hannah is extremely pregnant at this point, and the physicians, as well as most of the political unrest, are centered in Philadelphia. So they rent a house called the Slate Roof House. It is there in January that their firstborn will come into the world. This would be John, and young John will pick up the nickname John the American because he's the only one of the Penn children born this side of the Atlantic.
Let's fast forward to 1712. William suffers a stroke. How does that affect his governance of Pennsylvania? So
William's stroke is debilitating, and it was another critical time. That visit of 1699 to 1701 is when Penn, with Hannah's help, does the most substantial governmental work. It establishes freedom of religion. In England, if you didn't worship the Church of England at that point, you had to pay a tax, a tithe. In Penn's government, if you were intolerant to other religions, you had to pay a tax. You were allowed to worship as you choose. He sets up a judicial system where we are judged by our peers, and the jury sets our fate, not the judge. There are two parts to the legislature. One was an appointed one, the other was an elected one. But I think the most important part of that governmental work at that point is Penn set it up so the common man had the right to vote. His earlier frame of government, you had to be a landholder. This mirrors what was going on in all the other colonies, and more important, what was going on in England. In England at that time, you needed to own a huge amount of land and pay substantive taxes to the crown to get a right to vote for Parliament. Actually, only 3% of the English population could vote for Parliament in Penn's time and the whole way up to the American Revolution. Penn sets it up that now the common man, not just landholders, have a say-so in their government. About 50 years after it takes effect, there is a bell cast in the new governmental state house in Philadelphia in celebration for Penn's frame of government. Everyone remembers it because it has a crack in it. And the Liberty Bell actually celebrates Penn's framing of government. On that voyage of restructuring government, hand in hand was Hannah. And there's a point when William is under the weather that Hannah is corresponding with James Logan, and the content of that letter clearly indicates she's in the game with him in discussions of how this new structure of government is going to be done. While he's doing that, he's of course fending off factions within the legislature at that time who have their own ideas about how governance should be. Pennsylvania at that point was a proprietary colony. It belonged to the Penn families. But he wanted to rule with the assent and consent of the people. Skipping forward to your question of 1712, Hannah had lost her beloved father, Thomas, and they were close. She is named the executrix of his estate, and one of the things that sort of jumped out at me when I had first come across this was frequently it would have been the job of the son-in-law, the male, to do this. Now, keep in mind, there is an equality within Quakers that was not being mirrored by general society at that point. This may have influenced it, Thomas Callahill's decision. However, I also know that Thomas Callahill was not enamored with Penn's financial skills. And Penn tended to hemorrhage money on things, and Hannah had a great fiscal mind. It is shortly after working on settling this estate that William is seized by a stroke. That stroke is debilitating. He has lost the power of speech. He'll recover somewhat, but he'll actually go through a series of 5 strokes for his life. And Hannah actually is told by his physicians, please keep business off of his plate, off of his mind. It's too stressful for him. So from 1712 up to the point of his death, the person actually calling the shots for the proprietary colony that belongs to the Penns is Hannah Penn. And she faces a number of challenges. James Logan has stayed behind, and he has acted as the Penn's agent here. Hannah corresponds with him. James Williams had this terrible illness. He hasn't recovered. I need your help to run the colony. Logan responds, I was getting kind of fed up with your husband. Things are still a mess here. But for you, my friend, because they established a lifelong friendship on that sea voyage on the Canterbury, I'll hang in there. And between James Logan and Hannah Penn, they begin to unravel the fiscal challenges as well as the structural and boundary challenges that face the Pennsylvania colony. The business model at that time was if you and I were to buy land from the Penns, we would owe quit rent. That's a medieval term. You owe homage to the feudal landlord, or in this instance, it would be the proprietary family, like the proprietary family in Maryland would be the Calverts. But you also owe taxes. That's the rent part. The boundary dispute that develops during Penn's first visit in 1682 between the northern boundary of Maryland and the southern boundary of Pennsylvania will basically create irreconcilable differences between William Penn and the Lord Baltimore, the hereditary title and the leader of the Calverts. The Calvert claim from 1634 went up to the 40th parallel. Penn's claim was based on longitudinal lines, 4 longitudinal lines inland from the Delaware River, and it didn't establish a southern boundary. William Penn calls on the Lord Baltimore and assures him that the 40th parallel actually runs through modern-day Baltimore. The truth is, it's sited about where the Pennsylvania Turnpike currently crosses our state. Those two will disagree all their lives, and those families will disagree for 2 more generations until the King of England in the mid-1700s hires 2 surveyors in England and ships them over here. One's named Mason and one's named Dixon, and they will shoot a line, and the king says, "You people will shut up and live with it." And the line actually establishes the north-south boundary between the 2 states, but it travels west.
How unusual was it for a woman like Hannah Penn to hold this much political power in the early 1700s?
It was very unusual for within proprietary families and so on. Of course, at certain points in English law, there was a queen, not a king, who were calling things, but they were not royalty. In the Quaker faith, there was a spiritual equality among the sexes, and because of her business sense and her building alliances, and she would correspond with members of the legislature here, Dixon or Dickinson, Logan, Norris, as allies of hers. And she actually kind of played the card, "Oh, I'm just a woman, I need your help," and so on. She was brilliant. She built alliances with the Shakers and the Movers that helped her move things forward and move the proprietary interests of the family, but also the governance of the colony forward. One of the things that she accomplished that her husband didn't was a kind of a truce between Maryland and Pennsylvania, and an agreement that neither would seek compensation taxing the residents in the land in question. That's critical, but that was a huge hole in the Penn's ability to collect those quit rents. If you wanted a great tax dodge and you lived in that area back then, I don't know whose colony I'm living in, so you people figure it out. It was, again, a stroke that Captain Markham, as a lieutenant governor, couldn't pull off, William couldn't pull off, but Hannah was able to negotiate with the Calverts in a way that actually helped both colonies. She also maintained Penn's good relations with native peoples. And when Penn finally passes, it was actually after his 5th stroke in 1718, the Lenape people actually send a robe to her. In the account that I read, it was lined with turkey feathers, and it was a fur robe. Descendants of the Lenape today are federally known as the Delaware, and I told the head of their cultural education that, and he kind of chuckled. He says, "No, that's a matriarch's robe. The feathers go on the outside because the feathers shed water, and the fur on the inside keeps you warm." But the story that goes with it, it was to comfort her in her mourning. And I think that speaks to the relationship, which was certainly had flaws between the Penn family and native peoples, but still holds up in legend as well as some critical analysis.
How did Pennsylvania's colonists respond to her leadership?
There were some who opposed the proprietary interests, whether it was Penn or Hannah. There were certainly men who felt that they could do a better job and should do a better job. But generally, the populace liked Hannah. There was a respect, almost a reverence for the Penn family as a whole that would continue the whole way up to the American Revolution, when the last of the Penns is actually residing during the Revolution, or of the proprietary interests here. There are certainly Penns back in England. He's a royalist, believes in king and crown, not active as a loyalist opposing the revolution, but never molested by the populace, even though there are riots in Philadelphia against people and so on, and he will ultimately return. Hannah had a great deal of respect from her peers within the faith as well as within the governmental entities. She is running things in absentia, which makes it even more challenging. It would take 3 months for correspondence to make it one way. So with hot topics, a lot of times the legislature would have to wait. This was not uncommon. It was the same thing when William was in governance.
How did her role differ from what we might expect of First Ladies today?
In many ways, she was calling the shots. First Ladies today have a very important role. They are, each one of them generally takes on a cause. Currently, education, working with not-for-profits, mentorship is a current topic with our current First Lady, and really hosting events, acting as a support network for the governor, and giving a face to the people of the Commonwealth. And the name Commonwealth actually goes back to Penn's time. The Commonwealth period of England is under Oliver Cromwell. Today we carry on the name Commonwealth in a number of our states, Virginia, a sister state, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, but it's actually a period term that continues on. The roles of First Ladies, they've done substantive work for us. When I was young, my mother was volunteering at the state library in Harrisburg, and it was Ginny Thornburg as First Lady that took on reading and literacy as a benchmark of her work for all of us here in the Commonwealth.
How is Hannah Penn's legacy and her impact in Pennsylvania remembered today?
There were two historians, I'll use the term historians, history buffs, who really lit the spark in me related to Hannah Penn. One was Susan Stitch. She was the director of the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, would eventually become the Smithsonian director of the American Portrait Gallery. And she was conspiring with First Lady Susan Corbett to raise the awareness of Hannah Penn. And those two challenged me to do a deeper dive on friend Hannah and find out a lot more. Mrs. Corbett was so taken with Hannah, and she felt that there was a missing piece in our state capitol, that she raised private funds, contracted with a portrait artist named Eileen Cooper, who came to Pennsbury. We dressed Eileen in period clothing so she would know how it draped and fit on the body, and did a modern portrait of how we think Hannah Penn would have looked to hang in the governor's office. Sadly, later generations of governors have taken that portrait down, but people can see it in the State Museum directly across the street from the Capitol. That really helped people recognize that in function, Hannah Penn was our first female governor. She was never granted the title. She was never granted the title of proprietrix. However, to her, I think it was more important, and I would say part of this is her Quaker upbringing. Titles weren't something that people did as Quakers. Everyone was spiritually equally. So she wouldn't have worried about not being called governor or proprietrix, but she did want people to follow her lead in governance, and they did. And Pennsylvania was in danger of being sold back to the crown. Her husband, before his strokes, was in difficult financial straits. He had mortgaged Pennsylvania at a certain point in his life. He had been accused of treason. Treason is a capital offense. it was because of his close relationship with James. When Charles II dies, James ascends the throne, and James is an out-of-the-closet Catholic and proud of it in Church of England-dominated England. James's son-in-law and daughter begin to raise armies. James's father had been beheaded in a civil war, so James advocates. And when accused of treason and asked to renounce James, Penn will say, James was my friend at his zenith. He will be my friend in his desolation. He will not turn on James. So he's jailed. He pleads his case. He'll actually write his life axioms, and if anyone wants a quick William Penn read, it's kind of fun. It's called Some Fruits of Solitude, and it really talks about a lot of his visions about how life should be, from governance to home life to friendship and marriage. While all this goes on, Penn mortgaged the colony to protect it for the family. If he's executed, the family will still have the colony. But the subordinate calls in the chit. Penn doesn't have the money to pay him off. And legislature in England, Parliament, is discussing removing proprietary colonies. So Penn tries to sell out. He turns to Queen Anne. The asking price is £20,000 sterling, and she rejects it. In desperation later on, he will drop the purchase price to £12,000 sterling, but while a deal was being worked out, he's hit with that stroke. And his son from the first marriage wants to contest that sale because he believes Pennsylvania should be his birthright. There will be an ugly family feud. Queen Anne will kind of look at the Penns like, you people are crazy, back out of the sale, leaving Hannah to deal with Pennsylvania, deal with an infirmed husband, deal with the estranged family of that son from the first marriage who abandons his family, and Hannah takes them in, cares for them. Letitia marries a gentleman that Hannah will call a muckworm. Think of that as money grubber. And insist on a dowry in cash, rejecting offers of land in Pennsylvania. Hannah, while managing the finances here, will actually have to pay this dowry off over a series of years. Even though she detested the guy, she adored her stepdaughter and wanted to do right by her. You know, the things that she faced were huge, and the grace with which she took on all of these challenges throughout her life not only are a model for people today, but really we're enjoying some of the fruits of her labor as Pennsylvanians.
We've been speaking with Doug Miller, Museum Director at Pennsbury Manor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Listeners like you make PCN programming possible. Full episodes of PCN's history and culture content, like the interview you just heard, are available to stream with the PCN Select app. Explore other documentary programs, event coverage, and a lot more. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit PCNTV.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.